I'm going to put some names in here just to kind of keep it straight so the question kind of makes sense, because you're asking about a friend situation and there's a couple of people involved. So Kevin Ice, thanks for the super chat. He said, a friend, and let's call this Doug's family, a friend has a brother, we'll call this Bob. So Doug, his friend Doug, has a brother, Bob, who is a man who thinks he's a woman. Just put it that way. Bob's parents are allowing, Doug and Bob's parents are allowing Bob, the brother who thinks he's a woman, to live with them. My friend, that would be Doug, is married with 2 kids. So Doug, his friend, has 2 children. Is it wrong to keep the kids away from his parents? And I think he's saying
the grandparents. Because if they're with the grandparents, then Bob,
Doug's parents, the grandparents, they're also
then
with
Bob will be there too.
The man who thinks himself a woman.
And doesn't just think, but I think we're meant to assume from the question also is dressing like a woman.
Yeah. No, they should not be around that individual.
No.
I can give a biological reason for it. So men, we have a number of receptors in our body. They're androgen receptors, and they're tuned to testosterone. So there's some estrogen in a man's body, but he is tuned thoroughly, top to bottom, to receive, respond, and be hormonally balanced with testosterone. Women, in the same way, it's inverted. They have EHR1 and EHR2, estrogen hormone receptors, and they're tuned to estrogen. When you introduce estrogen into a man's body, a body that is not tuned to take it into large amounts, so the hormone transition, you destroy him psychologically. That is why these individuals are typically violent. You've taken everything that's about a physiological, balanced state in a man. His energy, his mood, his emotions, his regulation, all of those different things, you've taken them and the way they're supposed to be arranged, the delicate balance that exists in the brain and the body and the endocrine system, you've taken it and you've flooded it with something absolutely foreign, and these people generally are violent. So just at that level, taking that thing, and you see this when people call them the wrong names or whatever, they lash out. It is not physically safe to be around. And then I think someone else brought up the spiritual component. It is also terrible to be around. As an adult male who's perfectly safe, I've gone on work trips and seen individuals like this, and I am disturbed. And if I was I've said this online before, if I was in a restaurant and someone like this came up to be our server, I would leave if I was with my kids. I wouldn't be around it. And so I get that it's grandparents. But I also think, especially because Bob is, in this case, being allowed to live with them, you say we can't come over and we won't go over, and we think that you should encourage Bob to stop living this lie.
Right. And hold it as a prerequisite that if he chooses not to, then I'm sorry. We love you. You're our child. But we cannot support you in this lifestyle. So if you're not willing to change, then you have to move out. And in the meantime, what you could do also with the grandparents is you said, we can't come there because Bob is there, but you can come and visit the grandkids without Bob here at our house. So you could have
honor them,
some kind of honoring your parents in that sense. And then the only thing that I was going to add to it is just more of a little bit more of like the spiritual theological side, but it's just like with anything else. So like families, extended family can always be challenging, and but like let's say you have kids, and then you have a brother, you have a sister. Let's say you have a brother, and so it's your kid's uncle, and you only see him once or twice a year. And let's say that he's not a Christian, he's not a believer, and he curses like a sailor. Mm-hmm. Well, you can talk to him, before the next Thanksgiving, when you're all going to be together and the kids are going to be, in his presence for, 3 days straight or whatever it is. And you can talk to him, preemptively and say, hey, look, our kids, we have young children, and we are respectively requesting that you would honor our kids and honor us by not cursing in front of our kids. And you can say that. And hopefully, even as a non-Christian, hopefully he would be respectful enough to oblige and say, okay, that's fair, that checks out, I understand. I won't be dropping F-bombs in front of your 3-year-old. I say, thanks. And so then you can go to Thanksgiving, and here's the deal. On the inside, internally, he's still an unbeliever, he hates God, he's going to hell, and he is someone who curses like a sailor. And so he's still a sinner. And for that matter, we're all sinners, but he's particularly a sinner and in a state of sin, but he's not actively sinning. He's not actively sinning in front of your children. So you have a sinner who's going to be with you being present as well, who's going to be in the presence of your children. But you're not permitting him, you're permitting a sinner to be present with your children, but you're not permitting someone to sin in the presence of your children. And there is a difference, right? So like we've talked about this even, as elders and deacons with our church. And we even had, some of the members of our church ask, like, what would our policy be? Like if somebody, if someone, again, trying to avoid the word for the sake of the algorithm with social media and all that kind of stuff. But if a man who thinks he's a woman and dresses like a woman, if he shows up to church, if somebody like that shows up to church, what are we going to do? Like would we pull them aside? And what we've told them and what we've decided is there's a difference in somebody who is gay. If a gay man comes to church, and assuming he's not there, to be hostile, but he's like, all right, I actually want to see what this is about. I'm not a Christian. I'm a gay man, but I'm going to show up and I'm going to sit and I'm going to listen to the sermon and I want to see what's going on. Well, a gay man can show up to church as someone who's in a state of sin in that lifestyle, but he's not sinning at church
in that moment.
Right? In that moment, exactly. Like he can show up alone, and he's not in a public, visible, external way sinning in front of everybody who's present. But the person who thinks that they're the opposite sex and walks and talks and dresses as though they're of the opposite sex, that person, it's not just that they're in a lifestyle of sin, but they are sinning, actively sinning in the church service. And so it applies across the board, even for Christians, for members of the church. Like everybody who goes to our church, and any church for that matter, is a sinner, including me. Everybody's a sinner. So sinners get to go to church, but you don't get to sin at church. Certainly not publicly and in a witnessable, visible fashion. So like we have people in our church who, like, everybody's a sinner, but nobody, even if you're a Christian and you're heterosexual and you're a member in good standing, you don't get to go to church and, shout the F-bomb, in the middle of the sermon. Like nobody gets to do that. And so in the same way, like you don't get to visibly, publicly sin. There's a difference in being a sinner versus sinning. Nobody gets to visibly, publicly sin at church in a way that would be, distracting and jarring for everyone who's there. And so that's what makes the situation unique when it comes to not just, this person occasionally steals, or this person occasionally curses, or this person even is gay, or this, like what's so unique about this particular sin is you're talking about, with this particular sin, you're not just in a state of sin, but you are 24/7 actively sinning all the time.
Lying about who you are and who God made you to be.
That's right. You are publicly, visibly, for every single person who can see you, you are actively sinning. You are portraying something that is perverse, something that is unnatural, something that is against the Word of God. You are lying. You are practicing deception. You're being manipulative. You're being confusing and deceiving. And so I think that is a fair. I will leave it there. But just a rule of thumb, pretty simple, pretty fair. But rule of thumb for parents is nobody, whether it's your family member who's a Christian or a family member who's not a Christian, whether it's this or that, it doesn't matter. As a parent, no person has the right. Nobody is permitted the right to sin in front of your kids. You, right, as a parent, are allowed to say, no, I'm not going to allow a bunch of people who are, blackout drunk to come over to the house in front of our kids. Or I'm not going to allow...
Either you won't be here or I won't be there.
That's right.
You're leaving or I'm going.
Exactly.
Yep.
And unfortunately, with this particular sin, that's what it's the equivalent of. It's the equivalent not just of being in a state of sin, but it's the equivalent of actively, continually sinning. And there's, your kids will notice. I've been in those environments, unfortunately, and my 3-year-old I remember distinctly, it's etched in my mind, my 3-year-old daughter looking, kind of tilting her head and confused and not understanding, why is there, I know that that's a man, but he's wearing makeup and you don't subject your children to that. That's their problem. That's their fault. They made that choice. And you are not being hateful or disrespectful. Your obligation is not to a deluded person's fantasies and assuaging their conscience. Your obligation is to your children.
And dads, this is why you need to be big and intimidating and carry, so that when that happens, you can stand up and kids, go to the car. And I'm going to, do whatever needs to be done. Say no. Ask them to back off.
All right, the clock is running out. You need to go and register now for our Christ is King, How to Defeat Trash World Conference. It's happening the year of our Lord 2025, April 3rd, 4th, and 5th. That's a Thursday, Friday, and Saturday. And by God's grace, we're able to provide for you an all-star lineup. We've got Steve Dace, Calvin Robinson, Orrin McIntyre, Dr. Stephen Wolf, Eric Kahn, David Reese, Andrew Isker, John Harris, A.D. Robles, Dan Burkholder, Dusty Devers, Ben Garrett, C.J. Engel, and yours truly, Pastor Joel Webben. Come on out, join us April 3rd, 4th, and 5th, 2025, Thursday through a Saturday. Go to rightresponseconference.com to register today. Again, that's rightresponseconference.com.